Shalom fam, I just wanted to quickly announce that I've joined forces with an awesome merch company called Sanctified Supply Co. They're a whole Bible-believing company with a mission of spreading their conversation-starting products all across the plane of God's green earth. As you can see, I'm wearing a "We Must Hang on His Words" tee. All of their apparel is personally screen printed in their mom and pop shop in the good old US of A. So if you'd like to support my ministry and their company, head on over to sanctifiedsupplyco.com and toss one of these t-shirts into your cart. Type in Ken10 at checkout and save 10% on your entire order. Check the link in this video's description for quick access. Hello, and welcome to Hanging on His Words. My name's Ken Heidebrecht, and you are watching Honor of Kings, Season number 4. And we are going to be touching on an interesting addition to a book we are all familiar with within the canon of 66 called the Book of Esther. And so my amazing, astute, Clark Kent doppelganger-like co-host himself, Sean Griffin, is in the house. How's it going, Sean?
What's going on, Ken? Thanks for having me back. I'm excited for this Additions to Esther episode. This has been a long time coming for this one.
Yes, it has. I'm excited too. There's some interesting content in these editions for sure. Makes you wonder why, it wasn't additionally part of the original canon, so to speak, and why we find it in the Greek Septuagint. So, Sean, what I have here holding up is the Lexham English Septuagint. It's a great version, actually. I highly recommend people check that one out. And that's the version of the additions to Esther that we're going to be using on screen tonight as we go line by line through it. I thought that was really well done how they laid it out, Sean. It was kind of hard doing some of the prep work for this show, checking out different manuscripts and seeing how they laid out the chapters. They were kind of obscure. So I just went to the old hard copy and saw how they did it there. And I thought, okay, this was the way to do it. And so I just kind of copied it out of that. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight, and I'm looking forward to it, brother.
All right.
Before we get going, Sean, would you mind telling the fine folk who might be new here, and maybe to those who have joined us historically over the years, as to what we do here at Honor of Kings? Give them just a quick synopsis as to what this show is all about.
Yeah, so our goal is to look at these books that have been in and out of different canons throughout history. As you know, as he was just explaining, they're even in some Greek Septuagint canons still to this day. But other ones were never accepted into a canon. So they were always been rejected. They're considered Gnostic, and theologically, they have a lot of issues with them in regards to lining up with the canon of 66. Whereas other books completely line up with the canon of 66, and you have to ask yourself, why were they ever removed from the most dominant Western canon? The Western canon is not really a word, but that's just the terminology I'm using because most Western churches now have adopted a 66-book canon, even though it used to be 80 books. So that's how I refer to it, as the Western canon. Sometimes I'll even just call it the American canon, but I know that's not accurate either. But just to give our largest viewer base a point of reference to understand why we're talking about, there's the average Christian, Ken, they don't realize that entire groups of Christians by the millions have different canons with different collections of books. They have that core 66, but they have a different collection around it, and that's some of the books we look at and we try to test. So we're testing them through their manuscript chain of custody historically, as well as the theological claims they make.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much for that synopsis, Sean. That is what we do. That's the heart of Honor of Kings, is to get people digging and questioning what is this Bible truly all about, in terms of, why does my Bible have this amount of books, whereas the guy across the pond has more books or less books? So this is kind of the heart and thrust of this show, is to just kind of dig into these books, delve into them, and compare them line by line with and compare and contrast with the canon of 66 and see, do these things line up? And so Sean and I have had a few seasons of doing so. We've had a lot of fun doing it, and so we're going to do that with tonight's additions to Esther as well. But before we get into that, Sean, I just want to say hi to a couple folks in the chat here.
Okay.
We got our brother, Wes Blaze, saying he's looking forward to it. Shalom, brother. Miss Marsha's here saying this is going to be good. Thank you, sister. Appreciate you coming. Budgie Girl 24 is here. Robert Daniels is here saying additions to Esther. Yes, sir. That's right, brother. Is that like a sequel? No. I mean, hopefully by the end of the episode, we'll see whether or not it should be just grouped into one. Or maybe we won't agree with it. I don't know. We'll see where this goes. Stick with us. Miss Dahlia's here saying, hey, family. Shalom, sister. Thanks for joining us. Tracy Jones, blessings to you all, dear brave believers. You as well, sister. Thank you. Daniel Modglin, shalom, fam. Shalom, sister. Say hi to a few more folks, and then we'll get started here. Chauncey Lump saying shalom. Shalom, Chauncey. Mr. Stewart, it's been a while, brother. Haven't seen you around. Hope you're doing well. Shalom to you too. Van Hap is here saying Hebrews and Shebrews. Shalom, shalom. Lifting the veil, exposing darkness. Hello, fam. Shalom. How's it going, brother? Appreciate you coming. Devin Horner's here saying shalom to everybody as well. Larry Angelo is here as well saying shalom to all. And we have Zoran Vucinic. Sorry if I didn't pronounce that properly. Saying shalom to brothers. Us brothers. Shalom, brother. And we got Alan and Sharon Pizarnik saying shalom to us fellows. Shalom. And Gary Thompson. Joinery. Hello from Scotland. Cool. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you. All right, brother. We'll pull this up on screen here. Actually, before I do that, I want to make a quick announcement. And if you have any announcements, Sean, you go for it. Use this time to,
okay,
do what you got to do. Folks, I still have some of these available. This is the Creation Solar Calendar for the fall this year and into next year. And so if you guys are interested and want one, email me at creationsolarcalendar@gmail.com and we can discuss how to get one to you, okay? And for those who have placed orders already over the last few months, I'm getting a lot of emails saying, hey, is the calendar shipped yet? We had a national postal strike here, which unfortunately landed weeks before Christmas. And so they shut down, and it really jammed up our postal service here in this country. And so I was able to ship out according to the deadline that I had originally mentioned I wanted to do, which is early January. So everything's shipped out, guys. So you don't need to email me asking me. It's all shipped. All my stock, everything up to this point to January 15th, current, all gone. Out the door, heading towards you. Might take a couple weeks, but it's gone. So just wanted to make that announcement. Sean, you got anything before we get going, brother?
Yeah, we are going to be starting our basic course. That basically it's a 16-week teaching course to give you the basics of the Bible. Start that on February 3rd. So if you want to register for that, go to kingdomincontext.com. And then we'll be doing that virtually. It's a virtual class that we're offering. And it's 19 different topics, 16 weeks. We're excited about it. So
for sure.
I'm starting February 3rd.
Awesome. You're not going to want to miss that. I can tell, like, Sean definitely put a lot of work into that. So
yeah, I mean, even the first class that we're going to start out with is how we got our Bibles. So we're going to go through a little history as far as how the different Bibles were formed and how we ended up with what is the dominant Bible being passed around by missionaries in the world today, but as well as just look at other, with the very similar conversations like we have here today that we've been talking about on this show for 5 years. And so, I'm excited about it. And then, of course, week 2, we're jumping right into the gospel of the kingdom, laying our foundations.
Nice.
So it's going to be a lot of fun. And also gets you some Brave Tea at bravetees with an S.com, bravetees.com. Get you some tea. Wonderful, awesome way to get some vitamins, nutrients, and God's wonderful herbs in your body so they can clear out your digestion, help you with your mindset, all types of wonderful benefits to natural, herbal, organic tea. So that's at bravetees.com.
Very nice, Sean. I'll have to do that after the broadcast. Yeah. Feeling a little low in the health department. Yeah.
Winter time's coming around.
Yeah. I'll have to get my hands on some of that. Awesome, brother. Okay. So we got additions to Esther here up on screen. And we'll just start going. All right. So the way that I've laid this out is, like I said, it's the same way that the Lexham English Septuagint does it in theirs. And it just makes sense this way. It puts these additions, because these additions aren't like chapters, Sean, right? Like chapters after the book. It's little segments that are kind of sprinkled throughout the book. But a lot of times when you go online to try to read these editions, it's kind of confusing when you read it because they don't put it where it's supposed to be placed within the actual book of Esther. And so I just wanted to kind of, show on screen kind of where these parts are supposed to line up in the timeline of the actual book of Esther. So this is before chapter 1. Okay, this up and coming segment here. All right, I'll read it. In the second year of the reign of Artaxerxes the Great, on the first day of Nisan, Mordecai the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, of the tribe of Benjamin, had a dream. He was a Jew, dwelling in the city of Susa, a great man, serving in the court of the king. He was one of the captives whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had brought from Jerusalem, with Jeconiah, king of Judea. And this was his dream. Behold, noise and confusion, thunders and earthquake, tumult upon the earth. And behold, two great dragons came forward, both ready to fight, and they roared terribly. And at their roaring, every nation prepared for war, to fight against the nation of the righteous. And behold, a day of darkness and gloom. How do you want to do this, Sean? Do you want me to? Do you think I should just read this segment and then we can discuss it, or should we do each slide, breaking it up?
I think the segments are pretty short. We could probably read each segment. But I had a quick question though, because I hadn't seen how you compiled this before we started.
Okay.
What did you do with edition 11, verse 1?
Edition 11, verse 1. Gosh, this is what I mean.
Where it talks about the guy who translated it during the age of Ptolemy.
Oh, that's going to be right at the end. That's like the last.
Yeah, but I think if I'm not mistaken, let me look at it again. I think chronologically, it's supposed to go before 11:2, which is the start of the editions. Like chronologically, it's basically just, to my understanding, and tell me if you think I'm wrong here, it's just reading off a sentence saying who translated this and in what era they translated it, because it's been found in so many Greek copies.
I'm not 100% sure if I'm following what you're saying there. I'm sorry.
It's okay. So like this 11:1, at the bottom of that link you sent me for the additions to Esther, at the very bottom it has addition to Esther 11, and then it just has one passage, one stanza. It says
I wasn't using that link.
Oh, my bad. I thought you.
Yeah.
Did I use the wrong link?
Possibly. I think, are you talking about in Facebook Messenger, what I had sent you a while back?
You sent me a link saying, did you send two links and I got the wrong one?
I think I asked you, I said, which one are you using? Because this is like chronologically, it seems like it's kind of weird and out of order. And so I went to the Lexham English Septuagint, like I said, and found the same material, but they placed it in different parts of the entire book. And so that last one, I think, is right at the very end, the Ptolemies and the Cleopatra.
Okay, so this is just another great example for the viewer, as far as in modernity, how this information is passed on to us is still being presented by people who add certain numbers and chapter concepts to it, that there's questioning on why they did that, right? So the thing that I'm bringing up is, to my understanding, according to the link that I had, whoever presented the information in the link that I had put it together in such a way, they did have this edition 11 verse 1 stanza at the very end, but it is just telling, but why they made it edition 11 verse 1, which should be at the very beginning, I don't know.
I see what you mean. Yeah, I just pulled it up. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so either way, the information is just telling you who translated it and in what era it was translated into this, being translated from a previous language into a new language. And if this concept of Ptolemy translating the Septuagints in the 3rd century BC, this is just wonderful validation, because then you have in historically, additions to Esther was found in like 5 different variants of Greek.
Mm-hmm.
So this would make perfect sense during the age of Ptolemy, translating the Septuagint from the Hebrew to the Greek. It's telling you, hey, this was also translated at that time, and by what Levite priest did it too. So,
Yeah.
okay,
No,
a lot of
that's
conversation. The viewer doesn't have that info on the screen. We're going to get to it at the end, so just keep that in mind. Because if you're looking this up on your own and you get to the like pseudepigrapha.com and you go to the editions of Esther and you're
yeah.
confused why it calls this last line edition 11 verse 1, but the beginning of the bulk of the information starts at edition 11 verse 2.
Yeah.
We don't know why they categorized it like that. I couldn't figure it out. All
Right.
it's doing, that last line, all it's saying is just who translated it and in what era.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of, I mean, the viewer doesn't know. Like, I tried to have that conversation with you in Messenger, and I sent the pseudepigrapher a link to
Yeah.
you, being like, "What are you making heads or tails of this? Like, why is it layered out the way it is? Because it doesn't seem to be in a chronology that makes sense with how we would read just Esther in general." And you didn't.
Right.
You're probably too busy, didn't respond to it. But then I went. That's like, well, I went back to this Septuagint and thought, okay, I'm going to see how they do it, and this makes the most sense as opposed to the pseudepigrapher's version of how they do it. But I know what you're saying. I know what
I
you're
100%
asserting.
agree with you. The only reason I'm giving a heads up to the audience is because the average person doesn't have the Lexan Septuagint,
Sure.
but they're going to quickly Google it and they're going to see the link to pseudepigrapha.com.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why kind of like a precursor to all this, like I mentioned, you're gonna see how I'm layering it out. I'm gonna have slides that show you which chapter, at least the Lexham English Septuagint scholars have decided to put it within the timeline. That's how they're doing it. It made the most sense to me as I was reading it. It flowed better. And so as we go through this, the additions, you'll see where you need to go if you guys want to actually go to the book of Esther and listen to what's on the screen here with regards to where these are placed. Then you can read the edition before it and then read the actual book of Esther so that it lines up perfectly.
Awesome.
That's how I
Yeah.
would do it. But okay, so we can keep going here, brother. But yeah, thanks for clarifying that, because it might be confusing for someone who's trying to follow along or has a different
Yeah, they're
version.
just going to Google it. They're not going to buy the Lexham. So
Yeah. Okay.
but you should.
First,
You should buy the Lexham.
yeah, and it's good. It's a good source. I think it's one of the better versions of the Septuagint, to be honest with you.
Yep.
So verse 7, and behold, a day of darkness and gloom, tribulation and distress, affliction and great tumult upon the earth. And the whole righteous nation was troubled. They feared the evils that threatened them and were ready to perish. Then they cried to God, and from their cry, as though from a tiny spring, there came a great river with abundant water. Light came, and the sun arose, and the lowly were exalted and consumed those held in honor. Mordecai saw in this dream what God had determined to do, and after he awoke, he had it on his mind and sought all day to understand it in every detail. Now Mordecai took his rest in the courtyard with Gabbatha and Tara, the 2 eunuchs of the king, who kept watch in the courtyard. He overheard their conversation and inquired into their purposes, and learned that they were preparing to lay hands upon Artaxerxes the king. And he informed the king concerning them. Then the king examined the 2 eunuchs, and when they confessed, they were led to execution. The king made a permanent record of these things, and Mordecai wrote an account of them. And the king ordered Mordecai to serve in the court and rewarded him for these things. But Haman, the son of Hammedatha, a Bujaian, was in great honor with the king, and he sought to injure Mordecai and his people because of the 2 eunuchs of the king.
All right.
Okay, so that's the first section that would come before chapter 1 of the canonical version of Esther. That's
Gives you the backstory on how Mordecai was in the presence of the king and had such clout.
right.
He uncovered
Thoughts,
a
Sean?
plot.
What do you think? So we got Artaxerxes the Great. That's fine, right? That's the right king, right?
Right.
We got the
That's the
Meta
Greek
Persian.
transliteration. He's also called Osirhaeus in the KJV.
Yeah, Ahasuerus. Yeah.
Nissan is not a truck company from Japan. This is a calendar name.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So and he's got this dream. He's in the city of Susa, right? He's
Mhm.
I like how he's recognizing he's a Jew. I'm a Jew. You know?
Yeah.
Of course you're.
And
You
I
know
think
that.
that this city of Susa, think these details as far as the capital of Babylon, doesn't this all line up with, um
Was it Tobit?
is it Tobit? Yes, it was in the city of Susa, was it?
It was,
In
yeah.
Tobit? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So people, places, and names are currently aligning so far.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, brought them along with Jeconiah, king of Judah. Right. He's the right king who was exiled by Nebuchadnezzar. Right. Um, and then we have interesting kind of like apocalyptic verbiage, right? That we're familiar with. Behold, noise and confusion, thunders and earthquake, tumult upon the earth. Which lines up, in my opinion, kind of with what verse 7. Behold, a day of darkness and gloom, tribulation, distress, affliction, and great tumult upon the earth. It's interesting, Sean, how that's um, very reminiscent of like the day of the Lord type of
Yeah.
scriptures, right?
Yeah.
It seems like, and I think we've talked about this in previous Honor of Kings episodes. I think we might have been in like Second Baruch. I can't remember exactly which episode it was, but it seems like they like to use this verbiage to remind you of something, an invading king is coming, or like something bad is about to happen upon the nation, and so
Right.
they'll use kind of similar verbiage to describe that in the details.
Yeah, the scholars would call this apocalyptic language.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as we see, this is explained to us as being the two guys that was trying to overthrow
Yeah.
Artaxerxes and were supported by Haman. And so this seems to be Haman was a part of this, yet he wasn't overheard talking about it. It was just the two eunuchs whom Mordecai outed. And then Haman is still. So this basically gives you the illusion that Haman, if we put it all together, this to me, and you tell me what you think, but this to me is telling me that Haman favored these two eunuchs who were plotting this, which means he knew about it
Yeah.
and supported their mutiny to kill Artaxerxes, and then concocts the plot, as we see in the Book of Esther, to try to kill the entirety of the Jewish people within the empire of Babylon. So it's almost as if his he couldn't, like, it's almost as if his whole goal was to just exterminate the Jewish people, and he knew that he had to overthrow the king to do that first.
Yeah.
But
No,
but that got thwarted.
yeah.
So
He
then he
saw.
tries to do the edict later.
Yeah. No, it seems like he was wanting to use the eunuchs to further his own position within the kingdom, because he was second in command essentially, right? Like he was
Yeah.
delegated that position, and he obviously was seeking further position higher up in the hierarchy. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And
so okay,
he tried to like employ two assassins who were eunuchs to carry out this plan, so he can have plausible deniability, I suppose. But it just all manner of jokes could be made about being a man of being manless and trying to do this type of wickedness.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
lacking the intestinal fortitude, I guess, or
yeah,
um,
lacking the manhood, or as Jesse Lee Peterson would say, beta.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so Sean, I guess some people might say, okay, hold on a second. Are we to say that there's two separate instances of two eunuchs plotting to assassinate the king?
You mean
In
separate
in
instances?
Yeah, there was two separate instances, right? So if we're reading this and then we read the actual, Esther, canonized version of the Esther, we have the similar thing, right? Two eunuchs, Mordecai learns their plans, goes and tells the king,
Mhm.
right? So we're reading two. Are we reading two separate instances, or is this like his dream um do you know what I'm trying to say?
Keep going. Keep
So
going with
I
what you're trying to
guess,
say.
okay, so
'Cause
this vision that he has
Okay.
um clearly shows us that there were two eunuchs that were trying to assassinate this king, right? This is before chapter 1 in the canonized version of Esther.
Right.
So then as we read without without the additions, when you just read the canon, there's 2 eunuchs that try to assassinate the king within the same story. And he goes and tells the king, and the king confronts the eunuchs, punishes them by death, and then it's written down as a reminder.
Chapter 2 of the canon.
Yeah. So is this are these 2 separate instances of 2 eunuchs trying to do this to him, or is this kind of an overlapping of the same instance?
Okay, so can you go back to the slides real quick? Because I apologize, I don't have the Lexham, so I need to buy it too, and I don't have the compilation that you're reading. All I have is the pseudepigrapha. So I apologize. I'm trying to look
No, that's okay.
because did you already mix in the 12th edition into what you put up there? Have we not read that far yet? Because there's more explanation, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, let me look here. Yeah. This is
But it's not on screen, is what I'm saying. We haven't read that far for the viewer to know what we're talking about. Do you see the screen you're presenting?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is it right here, right? This is the same section.
Yeah. So is that including the additions of 11 and 12?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what threw me off then. Okay.
Yeah. So this is 11 and 12.
Yeah.
And it's placed at the beginning before chapter 1, according to the scholar. I know this is going to be an interesting kind of dance that we do here, going back and forth with scholars and trying to place it in the right spot. I get to reiterate what I'm asking, though.
I get what you're asking. I don't think there's 2 instances of eunuchs trying to assassinate Artaxerxes.
Okay.
I think one is a dream, which is as he says in chapter 12. Can you go back to the previous slide? Mordecai saw in this dream what God had determined to do, and after he woke, had on his mind, sought to understand it. And then this verse 12 seems to be already into edition 12 that you find in other accounts of this, to where then he took rest in the courtyard and heard these 2. Now, the word eunuchs, at least in my Bible, is not given to us. It's just their names that they call them the king's chamberlains.
Right.
So maybe other.
Okay. So 2.
Yeah, I guess other translations just call them eunuchs. Right.
So we got 2 individuals, and he's not dreaming anymore, right? We agree with that. He's woken up. This is actually playing out. And it's, he goes and he confronts Artaxerxes, literally. Artaxerxes deals with them. I guess what I'm asking is, and then as if we were to continue on the timeline, if this is placed correctly in the timeline, there's another set of 2 eunuchs that do the same thing, and he does the same thing, goes to Artaxerxes. It says, hey, you got 2 eunuchs that want to assassinate you. I think that's where some people have issue, is that there's 2
of the
same.
It calls them the same thing as and in the edition of Esther, verse 1, chapter 12, verse 1, which I apologize, I'm struggling to see the correlation of not see the correlation. I'm starting to see where in the slides that you've prepared which verse that is. I think it's maybe verse 12 or verse 11. I'm flipping back and forth between screens as well, trying to line it up for you.
Yeah.
But it seems as if this is the same people. Go back. Can you go back one slide, please? It seems to be the same names, is what I'm getting at.
So at the bottom, verse 12.
Gabatha and Thara, and that's what it's called in Esther chapter 2, I believe. Bigthan and Teresh, but let me go to the Greek Septuagint. And it's translated as, in the Greek Septuagint. It doesn't give their names in the Greek Septuagint. So is that what's throwing you off, to think that this is a different story?
Yeah, or like a different. It seems like there might be 2 separate instances where this is happening. You know what I mean? Like when you. I could be completely wrong here. I just thought like it was.
I think there's only one conspiracy.
Like in the canonized version, which chapter is it? Where
chapter 2.
Chapter 2, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And just for everyone that's also listening, that's watching, since we're already looking at chapter 2 in the canon as well, if you look at verse 20 in the Septuagint, it's because this is going to come up as a theological point of reference in the additions to Esther. It says in the Septuagint, and Esther had not discovered a kindred, for so Mordecai commanded her to fear God, to perform his commandments as when she was with him. And Esther changed not her manner of life. So Esther continued to abide in the commandments as Mordecai had taught her, meaning he's also abiding the commandments of God, which is why, God's rewarding him with dreams, helps him get promoted in the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
This is a fulfillment of the covenant that Solomon prophesies in 1 Kings chapter 8. That by abiding in the commandments, even while in captivity, you'll have favor with those who hold you captive. So,
okay. So real quick, but we can just move on from this. I want some clarity on what you think about that. So in chapter 2, verse 22,
Mhm.
or verse 21 down to the end of the chapter, there's 2 eunuchs, right? And Mordecai goes to Esther, tells her, she goes to the king. He confronts the 2 eunuchs and then deals with them.
Mhm.
So is that the same instance of what we're reading about right here on screen with the additions of Esther, or is that separate? Because I
in my
struggle with the
understanding, it's the
timeline.
same instance. There's only
Okay.
one occasion for a conspiracy to overthrow Artaxerxes. There's only one occasion where Mordecai is commended, as it says in the Septuagint, or then rewarded, if you will, and put in a higher place of honor in the court, so that now the king listens to him.
Yeah.
Because he's going to be intricate in this story as well. I should say integral. I don't think it's a separate I think what we're running into, Ken, is what we talked about before the show, which is this has been copied. That's why I was bringing up the date of its copy from edition 11, verse 1, where it tells you which Levite priest under the authority of Ptolemy copied this into the Greek, because a historical concept within all of Scripture that a lot of people don't like to talk about is scribal additions. They're natural, either indentations or anachronistic details, depending on the dates. That's why the first things I started pointing out was, this is Susa, this is the days of Nebuchadnezzar, into Artaxerxes. All the people, places, and events seem to line up. So there's no anachronistic insertions there, but this is being scribed. And so just as in Deuteronomy, you see language talking about how Moses is going to die. And then in chapter 33, it explains his death. And you're like, well, Moses didn't write that.
Right.
Right. It must have been a scribe who wrote this. So this is what, to my understanding, this initial editions 11 and 12 that you just read off in these first few slides is them explaining this dream of how Mordecai got this information to be tipped off to even listen to this. So the information is repeated a little bit. I'm agreeing with you,
Okay.
but it's not about the repeated information. It's about how he even was tipped off to overhear this, which was because he had a dream that he's been thinking about all day, trying to understand.
Right.
Does that make any sense?
That does.
At least that's how I read it. And that to me, that would be why they're talking about this. That's why they're talking about Mordecai, starting off the story of Esther, focused on Mordecai having a dream from God. That just my thoughts.
Yeah. That's in Esther chapter 10 as well there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, good. I just, I guess I just struggled with the timeline. Again, just jumping back and forth with the timeline and thinking like, Scripture does do that from time to time, where it'll, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, Sean?
Because there's scribes, and the average person, if they're not aware of this, it's because there's scribes making comments as they're scribing it from sometimes. And it doesn't mean that, like, at nowhere in no time is the book of Chronicles, which historians believe Baruch scribed, the scribe of Jeremiah, had chronicled the book of Chronicles and many of the things that Ezra then restored later in the 5th century BC. At no point does anyone think that any of the details that are given that doesn't match, even though it's like a new name of a new city, that doesn't match the original name of the city given back in like Numbers or Exodus or something like that, or Genesis. They don't think that it's disrupting God's message to the people. And this isn't stuff that was detailed, like write this down verbatim. This is the word of God that is then being chronicled by the scribes. And sometimes they do add extra details. They really do. And so this could be why Additions to Esther has been considered as a separate work as a complement to Esther and not originally put into the book of Esther. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's scribal additions that are easily noted.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
So for the average person, if they think that a scribal addition immediately makes it non-canonical, then I've got sad news for you. You're gonna
Yeah,
have to
there's a
throw
lot
out a
of books.
lot of books in the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I was definitely aware of that concept. I just, again, like the way it was written, it just seemed like possibly two separate events that were sounding similar. You know what I mean? Because I read online that there was a couple people that were struggling with the same thing. It's like, huh, that is weird. But yes, it's not as I was overthinking that.
Yeah. So what did you think about Bougian? That word Bougian? Because I tried to do some
Yeah, that's
research on that.
I don't know what language would that one have been. Is that the Greek of the Macedonian or the
Yeah.
Agagite?
It seems to translate in from the Greek as the word bully, or a boaster or a braggart.
Okay.
Braggart in the negative sense of not just talking about himself, but to the point of bullying others. Um, and so, but it's not it's at least all the research I could find, it doesn't seem to be a family name. Now, this is where it gets interesting because in the Masoretic, it's called the Agagite,
Yeah.
and then in the Septuagint, it's considered the Macedonian. But you have um, a lot of discussion about what that possibly could be because Josephus just straight up called him a descendant of Amalekites,
All right.
which is a big deal, right? Because the average anyone that may have studied First Samuel chapter 15, they see that the prophet Saul killed the king of the Amalekites because did I say that wrong? The prophet Samuel.
Samuel. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. The prophet Samuel killed the king of the Amalekites um, because Saul failed to do so and was just going to somehow keep him captive for some reason. Um, which I think is pretty awesome to see Saul take up a sword and jump into action. You know,
Yeah.
not I'm not glorifying.
Samuel. You mean Samuel? Yeah.
Excuse me, Samuel. I'm not glorifying death, but like I'm just saying it's very interesting because you don't really get that feel from Samuel. You're just like, wait a minute, what's no? But
He
like
goes Gandalf on him. Yeah.
he does, yeah. He's like, no, bring him to me. I'm gonna I want to see this guy that you should have killed, but you didn't. And then
Yeah.
it says he hacks him to pieces in front of the Lord. And you're
Yeah.
like, whoa. So now remember, this is the Amalekites, whom in Exodus 17 attacked Israel and was supposed to be a perpetual enemy of the Lord, right? And then finally, Saul went to go exterminate them upon the command of the Lord and did not do so. So the question throughout history and is what's going on with this guy Haman? Josephus calls him an Amalekite. The word Agagi in the Masoretic, as to my research, it seemed as if the Midrash, like the rabbis who didn't want to use the word Amalekite because of the command not to have to blot out the name of Amalekite from under heaven. So they didn't want to use the word Amalekite when referencing who this guy was in the book of Esther. So that's why they called him Agagite, which is like a family name of the king as opposed to the tribal name of the people. So then everyone still within a mindset of Israel would have known it's talking about a descendant of the Amalekites. But then the question comes up in the book of First Samuel. It doesn't say if the king that was killed by Samuel had any descendants. You would assume, being a king of a country, probably has probably more than one wife and probably some children, right? At that point in his life. But it just doesn't say. So then there's left to this concept of why are other translations calling Haman a descendant of the Amalekites? Are there any Amalekites left at this point? And if so, how did they get to their place? How did he get to a place of prominence within the Persian Babylonian Empire? Like, what's going on here? So, without this lack of information, um, it becomes a contentious point in history. And unfortunately, the additions to Esther, in my opinion, Ken, it doesn't help us at all because there's no etymological history to the word Bougian other than just the word for bully and braggart.
Right.
Which you're like,
Yeah.
what is
No.
that? But he does serve those qualities,
Yeah.
like, throughout the story, right?
Definitely.
But it doesn't help us with his identity.
Yeah. Kingdom Concepts is seems to be tracking with the historical stuff here. Agag was a descendant of Amalek. And that's who Saul was supposed to kill, right? Agag, the king of Amalek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, this is what it's assumed, but it's not. But to know if he had any children, that's not stated anywhere in Scripture.
Right.
If Agag had any children, so
Yeah.
of course, a lot of people want to believe that Josephus is, accurately portraying it as he talks about it in Antiquity of the Jews. I think it's book
Mhm.
2. And again, Ken, that's a whole nother rabbit trail. Like Antiquity of the Jews, Josephus goes into the editions or pulls elements and details from the editions of Esther to retell the story of Esther. But depends on which internet source you're looking at. Sometimes they call it book 2, chapter 6, and other times it's in book 11, chapter 6. So it just
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
gets
It's confusing.
the average person, unless you have a lot of time to do some research, it can be confusing.
Yeah. I'll have to read that in Josephus. I don't recall that. I read the complete works of Josephus when I was in college, Bible
Cool.
college. And that was many moons ago. So I don't recall that particular part in it, but I'll have to revisit that.
Yeah.
That's good. Good work, Sean. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
there's a
Sync
lot
there.
here as far as trying to line things up, and I can understand that this is a rabbit trail many people don't spend the time going down. I get it.
Yeah. Okay, brother. You good with moving on to the next
I
section
am.
there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so this is titled B, between chapters 3 and 4 of the book of Esther. Okay. I can read that, Sean. So this is a copy of the letter. And which letter is this? This is the letter that Haman, I guess, tricked Artaxerxes into. It's the whole edict of destroying the Jews, essentially, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a copy of the letter. The great king Artaxerxes to the rulers of the 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia and to the governors under them writes thus: having become ruler of many nations and master of the whole world, not elated with presumption of authority, but always acting reasonably and with kindness, I have determined to settle the lives of my subjects in lasting tranquility, and in order to make my kingdom peaceable and open to travel throughout all its extents, to reestablish the peace which all men desire. When I asked my counselors how this might be accomplished, Haman, who excels among us in sound judgment, and is distinguished for his unchanging goodwill and steadfast fidelity, and has attained the second place in the kingdom, pointed out to us that among all the nations in the world there are scattered a certain hostile people, who have laws contrary to those of every nation, and continually disregard the ordinances of their kings, so that the unifying of the kingdom, which we honorably intend, cannot be brought about. We understand that this people, and it alone, stands constantly in opposition to all men, perversely following a strange manner of life and laws, and is ill disposed to our government, doing all the harm they can so that our kingdom may not attain stability. Therefore, we have decreed that those indicated to you in the letters of Haman, who is in charge of affairs and is our second father, shall all, with their wives and children, be utterly destroyed by the sword of their enemies, without pity or mercy, on the 14th day of the 12th month, Adar, of this present year, so that those who have long been and are now hostile may in one day go down in violence to Hades, and leave our government completely secure and untroubled hereafter. All right. Sounds like a nice proposition, doesn't it, Sean? Like if you're somebody
I
who's
mean, only if you're Hitler.
seeking peace. Yeah, I know. You're seeking peace. You got this king who's like, I want to give you, mobility rights throughout my entire kingdom, but we got this pesky people who have different laws than us, and they're a thorn on our side, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's
Sorry, brother.
yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, it's just it's just funny how these politicians word things in order to get the will of their intentions out to people, to do something. Usually it's not something good, right? When they're politicking like this.
Right. So clearly the king is just believing the word of Haman. I don't believe the accusations of Haman, whether in the original canon or in the editions. that these were a hostile people. These were
Yeah.
people in subjugation. Literally, Esther and Mordecai are showing themselves extremely loyal and obedient to Artaxerxes throughout this story. Mordecai's already been given a place of honor because he's uncovered a plot to save the king, not to be hostile against him. But
Hmm.
yet, in spite of that, Haman still gets in his ear. He's literally wormwood.
Yeah.
He's in his ear,
Yes.
telling him lies and having him believe these lies about the people throughout the scattered nations. And with this false pretense of our kingdom is not peaceable and you can't travel and there's not peace because of this hostile group of people that's scattered throughout us. All right. One of two things could have easily happened here, right? Instead of killing them, I mean, since literally they're under your control in exile already, why didn't you just take them from all the places you scattered them and centralize them in one area and let them be
Yeah.
there, right?
Yeah.
Send them to Australia first, right? Or whatever. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? Like instead, it's we need mass genocide. So this is where the unclean spirits are involved. Haman is lying to the king about, and of course, just the rationale of any king who's supposed to be reasonably sound and with all kindness
Yeah. I know. That's why I laughed when I read that.
suddenly decides, you know what? Genocide is just the only option. There's just no
Yeah.
other way. There's no other way we could possibly impose some sort of restrictions on them, or we could keep them away from the highways. Are we just assuming that the Jews are literally just standing in the road like protesters in the United States? Like, what is going on? Like, what this?
Throwing sticks in people's spokes.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
the whole thing is just layered with nonsense, but yet it's written in this royal decree as if he's being a merciful king. Am I not merciful to everyone? All right, then let's genocide this group. Like
Yeah.
it's just the dumbest to me. This doesn't make a lot of sense as far as this supposed wise Artaxerxes, who's so easily duped by the
Manipulated.
lies of
Yeah.
Haman. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, like, you worded it aptly. He got wormwooded here. You're
Mhm.
basically reading the words of Haman, but through the verbiage of Artaxerxes here. And I was
Yeah.
gonna ask you, like, when I was reading this, I'm like, do we have any accounts? Is there any accounts of like riots going on, or were they bucking against, like, you know what I mean? Like, when
No,
we read
there's no,
Tobit,
the only account we have is the plot to kill the king was thwarted by a Jewish man who was loyal to the king.
right,
Like, it's
right,
just like, really? And of course, if we look into Tobit, Tobit was like, it was ridiculous how the Jews were being killed literally at random and their bodies left in the streets being persecuted in not Ezer Hadrian, but in whatever city that was, Ecbatana,
yeah,
in
Ecbatana, yeah,
Assyria. And Tobit was, and his cousin Akira or whatever his name, Akita,
Ahikara, Ahikara,
Akara, yeah.
yeah,
Tobit and his family members were all loyal to the king.
mhm,
They were good. Like the whole story of Tobit is that like his wife is working for somebody else peaceably to the point where she's gifted a goat as a reward because she's such a great worker. You know what I mean? So like they're not out there starting revolts and riots and trying to overthrow the Assyrian Babylonian Empire. And it's
yeah.
just funny to me, right? All
Well,
the
okay. Let's just say that there was, so when we see in Acts where Gamaliel's talking about the some assassin or whatever. Remember, he's like basically telling his kin there, like, let things flesh out. If it's not of Yahweh,
Mhm.
then it'll just dissipate, right? And then he mentioned something about like some guy in the desert who led like a revolt or something like that, and how that
Yeah,
went nowhere. They're known to revolt against the Romans, right? Like
there
there
was
were groups
definitely
of people who definitely, Judas being one of them, or Barabbas rather. So I'm just wondering if what we're reading in Tobit,
the Maccabee. Even in, I agree with you. First
and
century,
the
there was
Maccabees. Yeah.
claims of revolting, but in the first or the second century BC, we have the Maccabeans, whom apparently were chilling on their own until Antiochus came in and attacked them because he
Yeah.
saw that their temple had great wealth. So
Yeah.
like they were trying to do their own thing, live peacefully amongst themselves. So all I'm saying is I just think this is just the
Yeah,
enemy
it's
stirring up.
embellished.
Yeah,
I agree. That's why I'm asking. Like, we have some instances that where there were some factions of Jewish revolters
yeah,
against whatever power was taking over them. But this seems like an embellishment, a scheme of Haman to try to eradicate the Jews essentially. And Artaxerxes, he didn't vet it. He didn't vet any of the claims.
right,
He's just this lazy king, probably getting fed grapes on his throne. You're like, what
right.
do you want to do? Oh, sure, whatever.
Or unless it's just as how do I say this? It's as consistent as we see in the book of Daniel, which is what it says in verse 4 down here, who have laws contrary to those of every nation and continually disregard the ordinances of the king. So if their law is if the contrary laws being spoken of is do not bow down to other idols, and that's why they're disregarding the ordinances
Right.
of the feast days to these other idols and the observances and the worship times, and they're not going to those. But still, that just means they're not going to a gathering.
Yeah.
That means they're
Yeah.
staying at their house. They're not spending their time disregarding this ordinance to go to an idolatrous gathering so that they can overthrow the king.
Right.
Right. So like it's still like, really, how big of a nuisance are they really, other than the same thing that you and I see in our lives today? Have you ever been in a job where there's unbelievers you worked around and they're mad at you that you don't want to go get drunk with them after work?
Yeah, I've had that. Sure. Yeah.
It's the same spirit, man.
Yeah.
It's like you're just trying to live peaceably in your life and do righteousness and walk in just in the ways of God, and they don't like that. It bugs them.
Mhm.
They want you to go sin with them, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the majority of them definitely adhere to Yahweh's instruction. Was it in Jeremiah, where when he scatters you into the lands, like, plant vineyards,
Right.
have your households, like, integrate. You're gonna be there, right?
Pray for the welfare of Babylon,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you're going to be there for 70 years. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I have no issues with this particular segment that's wedged in between chapters 3 and 4. I mean, it's, to me, it
Yeah.
just gives us a better look at the letter itself and what was sent. And
Yeah. So that means at some point, I mean, if we take the claims of this book true, that means at some point in the 3rd century BC, which, again, this is where I struggle when we're looking at the manuscript chain of custody and we see the scholars. You and I both, came across some of the same information that the scholars claim. It's hard to verify anything before the 1st century BC
yeah.
or before 100 BC. And so I'm sitting there going, but yet the claim itself, that's just like oldest manuscript they have to date back to. But the claim itself is that Ptolemy under Cleopatra. And hang on a second, maybe I got my dates wrong on Cleopatra.
Yeah.
Is it the same
Ptolemy,
Cleopatra also?
30
Okay,
BC, 51 to 30
yeah.
BC,
So
right? So it's the 1st century, yeah.
she's in the 1st century. It's the Ptolemaic Empire. Okay. So they're saying that this was translated in the 1st century BC under the reign of Ptolemy and Cleopatra in that time. And so that means it already existed, right? Because it was translated from.
That's the assumption. Yeah.
Otherwise, it's invented at that point.
Right.
So, like, I don't know. I'm
Is that
just
is that how they word it? It's translated, or it was
that's what I'm seeing in the actual additions to Esther 11 verse 1.
had been translated by Lysicamus. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's a word to put emphasis on for sure. Translated.
Yeah.
That infers there's something to translate from another copy.
Right.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, so this is definitely before the days of Josephus. Josephus wasn't just making stuff up. This means it existed in some form. I mean, we historically they do have Aramaic copies of it. They have Greek copies of it, so it could be assumed that it existed from the days of Ezra to the days of Ptolemy in the 1st century in Aramaic until it was translated into Greek. But I'm just throwing this out there as far as trying to bring about this concept. So the point is, that means they had this extra information we don't have in the canon or in the can I just call it the original Esther? I don't know what to call it. I mean, I'm trying to find the right terminology here.
The known Esther, or like the accepted Esther.
Yeah. Or like the Harvard theological scholar, what's his name? Cutlass, what was his name again? We've tried to find his name again. His name was Torrey. I think it's like Cutlass Torrey. He's a contributor to the Harvard Theological Seminary, and his book he titled "The Older Book of Esther." That's how he refers to it, the Older Book of Esther, the original. That means they had this letter of Haman, all these details, and there's this concept here to translate to.
Yeah.
So
okay, so the Masoretic Esther version, and then we have the Septuagint version,
which is much more detailed than the Masoretic.
It is, and it has different. It's like the same thing that we dealt with when we were doing Job.
Mhm.
There's some differences in it, right?
Looks like that's our next episode.
Yeah, it might have to be. It might have to be. Okay.
That not just some differences. There's the differences that people want to see. Like the people that complain about Esther from the Masoretic and they say it shouldn't be canonized. In my opinion, you get those things cleared up in the Septuagint version of Esther.
You do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Okay. I say we move on.
Okay.
There's nothing conflicting in this letter itself, I didn't find.
No. No, it's just laughable in my opinion. But yeah, you're right. Nothing conflicting theologically.
Okay, so now we have the C section and D section. C section and D section are wedged between chapters 4 and 5. And so we're going to start with C. Do you want to read this, Sean?
Sure. It says, Then Mordecai prayed to the Lord, calling to remembrance all the works of the Lord. He said, O Lord, Lord, King who rules over all things, for the universe is in your power, and there is no one who can oppose you if it is your will to save Israel. For you have been made heaven and earth, and every wonderful thing in heaven under, excuse me. For you have made heaven and earth and every wonderful thing under heaven, and you are Lord of all, and there is no one who can resist you, who are the Lord. You know all things. You know, Lord, that it was not in insolence or pride for any love of glory that I did this, and I refused to bow down to this proud Haman. For I would have been willing to kiss the soles of his feet to save Israel. But I did this that I might not set the glory of man above the glory of God. And I will not bow down to anyone but to you, who are my Lord. And I will not do these things in pride. And now, O Lord God and King, God of Abraham, spare your people, for the eyes of our foes are upon us to annihilate us, and they desire to destroy the inheritance that has been yours from the beginning. Do not neglect your portion, which you did redeem for yourself out of the land of Egypt. Hear my prayer and have mercy upon your inheritance. Turn our mourning into feasting, that we may live and sing praise to your name, O Lord. Do not destroy the mouth of those who praise you. And all Israel cried out mightily, for their death was before their eyes. And Esther the queen, seized with deathly anxiety, fled to the Lord. She took off her splendid apparel and put on the garments of distress and mourning, and instead of costly perfumes, she covered her head with ashes and dung. She utterly humbled her body, and every part that she loved to adorn she covered with her tangled hair. And she prayed to the Lord God of Israel and said, Lord, you only are our king. Help me, who am alone and have no helper but you, for my danger is in my hand. Ever since I was born, I have heard in this tribe of my family that you, O Lord, did take Israel out of all the nations and our fathers from among all of our ancestors for an everlasting inheritance, and that you did do for them all that you did promise. And now we have sinned before you, and you have given us into the hands of our enemies. Because we glorified their gods, you are righteous, O Lord. And now they are not satisfied that we are in bitter slavery, but they have covenanted with their idols to abolish which your mouth has ordained, and to destroy your inheritance, to stop the mouths of those who praise you, and to quench your altar and the glory of your house, to open the mouths of the nations for the praise of vain idols, and to magnify forever a mortal king. O Lord, do not surrender your scepter to what is no being. Do not let them mock at our downfall, but turn their plan against themselves, and make an example of the man who began this against us. Remember, O Lord, make yourself known in this time of our affliction, and give me courage, O King of the gods and master of all dominion. Put eloquent speech in my mouth before the lion, and turn his heart to hate the man who is fighting against us, so that there may be an end of him and those who agree with him. But save us by your hand and help me, who am alone and have no helper but you, O Lord. You have knowledge of all things, and you know that I hate the splendor of the wicked, and abhor the bed of the uncircumcised and of any alien. You know my necessity, that I abhor the sign of my proud position, which is upon my head on the days when I appear in public. I abhor it like a minstrel's rag, and I do not wear it on the days when I am at leisure. And your servant has not eaten at Haman's table, and I have not honored the king's feast or drunk the wine of the libations. Your servant has had no joy. Your servant has had no joy since the day that I was brought here until now, except in you, O Lord God of Abraham. O God, whose might is over all, hear the voice of the despairing, and save us from the hands of evildoers, and save me from my fear.
All right. Thanks for reading that, brother.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, here we have Esther crying out to Yahweh, right? Acknowledging that her and her people are his portion, and to remember the covenant. And it's fascinating, Sean, that people don't want to accept even just the traditional book in the canon of Esther, right? But this signifies just how close they were to annihilation. You know what I mean? Like, this is a part in history where they it seemed like, where are you, Lord? Like, we're about to be wiped out completely, therefore nullifying your covenant promises, and how are you going to restore the kingdom and do all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so how you would want to cast aspersions on this book, it just gives you that historical backdrop of what took place in Israel's history there, right? Otherwise, it's a pretty silent time, in my opinion, without that information.
To me, it's fascinating because she actually calls upon the covenant that in a unique way. She calls upon the covenant in this prayer to say, your word promised that if we in vanity went after their idols, that we would be sent into exile. And they're now trying to disrupt. I'm paraphrasing, but she's basically praying. The enemy that we've been sent into exile, according to your word, is now trying to disrupt your word and kill us all together.
Yeah.
They're not happy that they've taken us into slavery, but they want us to stop us all together, to kill us all together, which she's calling upon the punishment. This is fascinating, right? She's being like, look, you promised we would go into exile,
but that we wouldn't be annihilated.
And that we wouldn't be annihilated. And they're trying to stop us from being exiled via annihilation. So I'm calling upon you to stop them. That's a very interesting concept. She's like praying for, like, look, I get it. We're in slavery. Keep us in slavery. Just keep us alive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's very interesting dynamic of this prayer. Also, did you mention when we started this edition that it should be between chapters 4 and 5?
Yeah.
I apologize if I missed it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all good. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's it would make a lot of sense that she makes this prayer after the end of chapter 4 in the canon.
Yeah.
If we're just looking at
beautifully.
logic. Yeah, because she's afraid and she gives instructions to Mordecai to go do some stuff, and then she's worried. She's afraid.
Yeah. It's interesting just how she's just basically saying, like, I abhor the fact that I've got this crown on my head, that I have to wear in public, but like when I'm by myself, I hate it. It's like a menstruous rag to me. Like, I don't like the circumstances I'm in.
Look, I'm not mocking. I just think it's a little, it's wildly extra that she's throwing feces on her hair.
Yeah, when she's that was early on. Eh?
Put on her clothes of mourning.
Sackcloth and ashes.
Put dung on her hair. That's just wild to me.
Yeah, it's a humbling thing. I mean, they tend to do that when when they're up against some pretty nasty circumstances like that, I suppose. Is that something we're supposed to do, Sean?
That's the thing, is what I'm getting at. I don't see the command. Like, I see the idea of fasting, of humbling yourself. I see people tearing their robes in mourning. I see people putting on clothes of mourning, which, as she took off her glorious clothes and puts on, beggarly clothes. But going to the extent of throwing dung on yourself, like, I get it, throwing the ashes on yourself, like, I get that. But throwing dung on yourself, like, okay, I get it. She's kind of went the extra mile,
Yeah, for sure. I like verse 9, where she says,
that means, she's in the kingdom, right? So that means she had to tell a servant to go to the stables outside of the palace and go grab some dung for her.
Yeah, when you think about it practically.
Unless it's her dung. Either way, it's not important. But the point is,
it's a crappy situation either way. What I mean?
It's all of it stinks.
Yeah. Verse 9. I like how she's hearkening back to this concept about Israel being his portion, right? This goes back to Jubilees. This goes back to Noah and his 3 sons coming off the boat, right? With Shem getting the portion, Yahweh's portion is Shem's. That the whole land inheritance thing, and how just that whole thing. To me, that it's just interesting how this kind of resounds in their minds of them being his portion, with regards to, from what I understand, is in relation to the land of promise of like, these people are part of the Shemites, the descendants of Shem are his portion. And so it's this motif that we get to see kind of sprinkled throughout the scriptures, but it's an interesting way how she calls upon him in this way. Like, don't neglect your portion. We are your portion that was promised to Shem way back in the land when you bring us to this land of Shem, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You're in verse 9, just using the word, going off the word
Yeah.
portion there. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I definitely know what you're saying. I thought you were talking about from the beginning, to destroy the inheritance that's been yours from the beginning. But yes, I definitely understand. I apologize. I kept looking for the word Shem. I was like, did I miss this
no,
earlier? You
no,
threw me off. I
I'm just
apologize.
saying I find that interesting how it's a hearken to back. If you don't have Jubilees, if you don't have that understanding of how Shem was given the Yahweh's portion, right?
Right.
The land that,
The portion of the Lord, I think it's Jubilees chapter 9. Portion of the Lord fell to Shem, and Noah was blessed and rejoiced because of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So which, yeah, they're still inside that portion here. Geographically, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to derail that. Apologize. So we can move on.
No, it's all good. Anything else sticking out in this? I know we covered quite a bit. It's hard to do this without having everything on the screen. I'm just gonna flip through some of these slides here.
Yeah, that's why I'm trying to add certain types of commentary to make sure that the viewer can follow us, because it's almost as if, and I'm not saying anything against your preparation here, Ken. I'm just saying I'm realizing now as we go through this, it's almost as if we should have like put Esther on screen as well, and then showed where this is supposed to go in.
Yeah, I know.
You know?
It's you're missing the context.
Yeah.
We probably should have tell the viewers, hey, read the book of Esther, be very
Right.
familiar with it coming into this, because we're just doing the editions itself. But I don't know. Maybe we can come back to this when we cross-examine the Masoretic and the Septuagint version of Esther.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be helpful, and we could maybe, because I know I think the Jerusalem Bible, is that what we were reading about, and some of the scribes said that the Jerusalem Bible did include the additions to Esther, but they just italicized them.
Oh, okay.
So they put them in chronologically and italicized them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so nothing is sticking out here. There's no weird
She's praying to God.
discrepancies. Yeah, she's praying to Yahweh. She's mourning in the way that they would traditionally mourn.
Now, I've heard a theory, and you can tell me what you think. Have you heard this also, that the rabbis who created the Masoretic translation, that they were upset with the story of Esther and the Benjaminites?
Yes.
Because they didn't come back with Nehemiah and Ezra.
Oh no, I haven't heard that.
Yeah, so that's what I've heard, is that Orthodox Judaism has a disdain for Esther and the Benjaminites, who stayed in Babylon after the 70 years and did not come back with the rest of the exiles.
Okay.
And that's why there's a huge portion of rabbis in Judaism that rejects.
They don't accept it. Yeah, they don't. Right. They reject Esther. They reject Daniel.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's another rabbit hole to go to. Well, we're gonna have to cover all that stuff for sure one of these days, man.
Yeah. Well, that could come up in the episode comparing the Septuagint and the Masoretic.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of modern scholars like to lean on rabbinic literature and opinions heavily, as if it's like, they're modern prophets or something like that. So they don't realize that they have their own biases strongly. Okay. So then this is D. So we just read portion C. This is portion D, which comes after C, but it's still wedged in between chapters 4 and 5. I can read this, Sean.
Okay.
On the third day, when she ended her prayer, she took off the garments in which she had worshipped and arrayed herself in splendid attire. So here's another form of worship, right, Sean? It's an interesting word. I mean, I'd like to see what the original word is there, but I guess doing what she just did in the previous segment there was an act of worship before him.
Mm-hmm. She arrayed herself and praying. Yeah.
And arrayed herself in splendid attire, then majestically adorned, after invoking the aid of the all-seeing God and Savior, she took her 2 maids with her, leaning daintily on one, while the other followed carrying her train. She was radiant with perfect beauty, and she looked happy, as if beloved, but her heart was frozen with fear. When she had gone through all the doors, she stood before the king. He was seated on his royal throne, clothed in the full array of his majesty, all covered with gold and precious stones, and he was most terrifying. Lifting his face, flushed with splendor, he looked at her in fierce anger, and the queen faltered and turned pale and faint, and collapsed upon the head of the maid who went before her. Then God changed the spirit of the king to gentleness, and in alarm he sprang from his throne and took her in his arms until she came to herself. And he comforted her with soothing words, and said to her, "What is it, Esther? I am your brother. Take courage. You shall not die, for our law applies only to the people. Come near." Then he raised the golden scepter and touched it to her neck, and he embraced her and said, "Speak to me." And she said to him, "I saw you, my lord, like an angel of God, and my heart was shaken with fear at your glory. For you are wonderful, my lord, and your countenance is full of grace." But as she was speaking, she fell fainting, and the king was agitated, and all his servants sought to comfort her. All right.
All right.
We get just a little bit more detail, kind of a little more dramatic version of Esther approaching, doing a no-no and approaching Artaxerxes here, which, he says that it's basically for the layman, this law that he had, right?
Right.
The fellow, just the commoners that are out there, they can't do this. This doesn't apply to you, though. But
Can you go back to the slide that shows 8?
yes. Yeah, this is interesting, right?
Yeah, because
Verse
if
8.
you look like the first 9 verses, it doesn't really detail what she's faint about and what she's distressed about. And it's like he just guesses correctly. It's like he's intuitive enough to know she's worried about this new law because she's, this is her brethren. Is this going to
You
apply
don't
to her?
think you don't think it was because she recognized that going before him unbeckoned was like a death penalty, essentially? Like she was fearfully approaching him, knowing like there's a law in
Yeah.
the Persians that they had that, right? Where you can't approach the king unless he beckons you.
Yeah,
And
but who let her in?
I don't know. I guess
So yeah.
Joe Blow can just approach the throne, I suppose.
No,
Have a
I'm
bodyguard.
just guessing that the guards let her in, but yeah, she's walking the line with this law for sure.
Yeah.
I also thought it's interesting that she can't talk until he touches her neck with the scepter. Is that a law too? Was that like no one speaks before me until I touch your throat with this scepter?
Yeah, I don't the neck part. I mean, in the older version of Esther, it talks about how you're only forgiven if the king extends the golden scepter towards you to touch. Then you're
Mhm.
forgiven, I guess. So
Okay.
either way, it took guts to do this. But what's fascinating is verse 8, right? Verse 8 says that Yahweh changed his spirit to that of gentleness. So we have Yahweh, interjecting here, which seems to be a standard that some scholars who want to cast aspersions on the book of Esther itself would say, well, Yahweh didn't intervene. There's no mention of God. There's none of this stuff. But here we have Yahweh changing his spirit.
Yeah.
So, which he tends to do that throughout the books.
Yeah.
He'll interject and he'll change countenances and change the spirit of this and that. He does the Saul. Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar, Darius.
Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely happens a lot. Yeah. So yeah, I think this doesn't change the story. It's not adding different theological promises of the afterlife, or it doesn't change the history of anything. I don't see any theological issue with this passage of addition.
Yeah, I'm not either. I'm not struggling with it.
It just seems as if she's using her womanly wiles to capture his compassion.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's me. I'm falling over. Come and catch me, dear sir.
She's embellishing things, to try
Yeah.
to gain his attention. That doesn't happen. That's yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, hey, it's just like, what is that girl's name? Jael? Was it Jael? She's like, I've got milk for you. Come into my tent. Take a load off. Take a nap. Come have nap time in my tent.
We'll boil it. We'll make it warm. We'll get those temples nice and warm. Yeah. All right. So we got E here. Was there anything else, Sean, that you want to touch on before we?
No, the previous passage. No,
Yeah.
there's nothing.
No?
Nothing
Okay.
that stood out that was concerning or worrisome about this.
Yeah.
It just makes you. It just makes you think. Okay, if the scholarly, if the chain of custody history kind of stopped at 100 BC with Ptolemy having it translated for him, and this is information that they translated, that who created these editions at what point and for what reason? If it wasn't inspired by God, then who created these editions? Because all they're doing is showing Esther and Mordecai being led by God.
Yeah.
So, like, what?
What's the ulterior motive to?
Yeah.
And
whoever the Levite was that translated it for Ptolemy, clearly, unless he was just commissioned to translate something nobody agreed with, which it seems to be, that would be a pointless concept, a pointless venture for Ptolemy to commission them to translate something that nobody viewed as important.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That seems to be kind of against the whole concept of having it commissioned into the Greek language. So
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on here. So this section E is between chapters 8. So this is very specific here, guys. Chapter 8, verse 12, and chapter 8, verse 13. So this part is wedged in between those two verses in chapter 8. Do you want to read, or do you want me to read? I can't remember who did the last one.
Yeah, I can. You said verse 12 and 13?
Yeah, it's wedged in between verse 12 and 13.
Because I think this was the verses that...
At least that's what the scholar of the Lexham English Septuagint say, that it's wedged in between. So, and it made sense when I read it through that it would be there.
I'm trying to think. I think this is the passages that, or this is it, but in the Septuagint, this is one of the spots that has a lot of extra information in the Masoretic in chapter 8, verses 8 through 14 or 9 through 14. So anyway, just FYI for the viewer, this could be interesting. It says the following is a copy of this letter. The great King Artaxerxes to the rulers of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 satrapies, and to those who are loyal to our government, greetings. The more often they are honored by the too great kindness of their benefactors, the more proud do many men become. They not only seek to enjoy our subjects, but in their inability to stand prosperity, they even undertake to scheme against their own benefactors. They not only take away thankfulness from among men, but carried away by the boasts of those who have nothing of goodness, they suppose that they will escape the evil-hating justice of God, who always sees everything. And often many of those who are set in place of authority have been made in part responsible for the shedding of innocent blood and have been involved in irremediable calamities by the persuasion of friends who have been entrusted with the administration of public affairs. When these men, by the false trickery of their evil natures, beguile the sincere goodwill of their sovereigns, what has been wickedly accomplished through the pestilent behavior of those who exercise authority unworthily can be seen not so much from the more ancient records which we hand on as from investigations of matters close at hand. For the future, we will take care to render our kingdom quiet and peaceable for all men by changing our methods and always judging what comes before our eyes with more equitable consideration. For Haman, the son of Hammedatha, a Macedonian, really an alien to the Persian blood, and quite devoid of our kindliness, having become our guest, so far enjoyed the goodwill that we have for every nation, that he was called our father and was continually bowed down to by all as the person second to the royal throne. But unable to restrain his arrogance, he undertook to deprive us of our kingdom and our life. And with the intricate craft and deceit asked for the destruction of Mordecai, our savior and perpetual benefactor, and of Esther, the blameless partner of our kingdom, together with their whole nation. He thought that in this way he would find us undefended and would transfer the kingdom of the Persians to the Macedonians. But we find that the Jews who were consigned to annihilation by this thrice accursed man are now are not evildoers, but are governed by most righteous laws, and are sons of the Most High, the most mighty living God, who has directed the kingdom both for us and for our fathers in most excellent order. You will therefore do well not to put in execution the letters sent by Haman the son of Hammedatha, because the man himself who did these things has been hanged at the gate of Susa with all of his household, for God who rules over all things has speedily inflicted on him the punishment he deserved. Therefore, post a copy of this letter publicly in every place and permit the Jews to live under their own laws. Give them reinforcements so that on the 13th day of the 12th month of Adar, on that very day, they may defend themselves against those who attack them at the time of their affliction. For God, who rules over all things, has made this day to be a joy to his chosen people instead of a day of destruction for them. Therefore, you shall observe this with all good cheer as a notable day amongst your commemorative festivals, so that both now and hereafter it may mean salvation for us and the loyal Persians, but that for those who plot against us it may be a reminder of destruction. Every city and country, without exception, which does not act accordingly, shall be destroyed in wrath with spear and fire. It shall be made not only impassable for men, but also most hateful for all time to beasts and birds.
All right. So Sean, imagine getting this letter, right? So you've got a previous letter, right? You're one of these satrapies or rulers of the provinces, and you're getting this after previously getting the other letter. You're like, wait a minute, what? Now, okay, now we're defending these folks. Now we got to defend them. Okay, it's fascinating how it's like he just didn't do his homework. It just exposes this laziness in the previous letter to now what did he say? Where was it? Yeah, verse 7, what has been wickedly accomplished through the pestilent behavior of those who exercise authority unworthily can be seen not so much from the more ancient records which we hand on as for investigation of matters close at hand. Like it's just he's basically, again, he's politicking here, but he realizes that he got duped, right?
Yeah.
By this Macedonian, which he says is the Macedonian is trying to essentially hand the Persian Empire over to the Macedonians.
Yeah.
Even though that initially was what it seemed like it might be part of Haman's objective there, according to the first chapter that we touched on, right? Like that he was angry with the eunuchs, or that Mordecai ousted the eunuchs as the eunuchs were going to kill him, and then he could come in and do what he wanted to do to seems like hand over the kingdom to the Macedonians,
right?
So
while exterminating the Jewish people exiled throughout the whole kingdom.
Yeah.
And to my understanding, 127 provinces from Ethiopia to India, does that include Macedonia?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, the irony though is, I mean, it's okay, we're with the Medo-Persians,
because he calls Haman a Macedonian who was a guest, but then he's also been made a father second in command throughout the whole kingdom. By the way, just for anyone listening, guys, for your Trinitarians out there, Isaiah 9:6, everlasting father language. Here's just another example of a ruler who's second in command, just like Christ is second in command to his father, who is also considered a father to all the people. It's just an ancient term for ruler, just like an El was, a God was. Doesn't always mean talking about the Most High God.
Yeah, good catch, brother. Good catch. But okay, so ironically, don't the Macedonians, like the Greeks, right? The Macedonians are Greeks, right?
Became.
They blended into that. Eventually, they did take over.
Yeah, Alexander the Great was from Macedonia.
Yeah.
And that's 3rd century. So he came in and attacked everybody. Yeah.
So that was pretty shortly after these events, right? Because we're placing Esther probably what?
Esther's 4th, 5th to 4th century.
Yeah. So not long after all this, the Greeks actually do come in.
100 plus years, there's continual warfare. I mean, we're in the same time period of, Leonidas in the 300. Yeah. The Battle of Thermopylae and all that stuff. Like, so there was already friction between those two nations.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to say thank you, Jewel Junction, for your super chat. Blessings. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and it's funny. I think it's on the next one, you go over and it shows, I'm sorry, maybe the next one. Oh, yeah, it calls Mordecai their savior.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and he's incorporating a lot more, stuff about the Most High and the living God, right? He's recognizing the true God. Yeah. He's having a humbling moment for sure through this interaction with Esther.
So what's interesting is some of the critics against this say it's a contradiction because verse 17 here says, basically, do not listen to the letter that Haman wrote to all of you.
Yeah. I
And
don't
supposedly,
see that.
I don't either, because clearly he's the emperor. He can do what he wants. He's the true king of kings over Babylonian Empire. But the the claim of contradiction that comes from the naysayers to this will say, well, the original decree by Haman said nobody could reverse it.
Yeah.
But you're like, bro, he's the emperor.
Well, the thing is, he's using his own their own laws, right? So it's right. They're right to say that they couldn't reverse it. So that's why the way it's worded, it's best that you don't execute the
Right.
letters that we sent. However, we're going to send them guards so that those who do
That's right. Yes.
want to attack them, at least they'll be defended. So he can add on to it, right? He didn't take away, he didn't
Right.
abolish the initial edict, but he's like,
He
nah,
just
we're going to make differences now, or we can now protect them from those who want to go and actually institute this.
That's right. Yeah, he circumvented it because Haman's mistake was the decree was on this specific day you can attack them. And then he's like, on this specific day, here's extra battlements to help defend them, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, and I encourage you not to do this. But at the same time, we see the same concept in the book of Daniel, which is why Darius throws Daniel in the lion's pit, because he's like, I can't reverse this decree. But God supernaturally can't. But there was no time period for which he was supposed to keep him in there. So like after a week, he goes and gets him out.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Exactly. And then of course the people that tried to set Daniel up, he also, I think he kills them, doesn't he?
He does. Yeah, he throws them into the pit. Yeah.
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 So it's interesting because I think that's what he tries to say in verse 7. He tries to, like you said, he's saying it in clear political language as he's trying to say, I got duped. And he even says, this person and their false trickery tried to take advantage of my goodwill as a good sovereign.
Yeah.
He's like buffeting all this language in there, like, hey, I'm a good king, guys. I just got, this guy just kind of pulled one over me. If you fool me twice, can't get fooled again.
George Bush, huh? I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a goof, eh? Did you see, side note real quick, did you see that video of which president was it that just recently passed away that they all want to? Was it Jimmy Carter, right?
Carter.
Did you see that? You saw that video of Trump with Barack Obama next to him, and they're just like goofing around and whispering, and George Bush walks by and like slaps Barack on the chest. Like they're not even hiding it.
No,
they're not even hiding that they're in opposition. You know what I mean? They're all just buddies and like laughing at us all. It's just insane.
It's a club that we're not in.
Yeah,
they're probably like, oh, that was a good zinger, Barack. He called me Hitler.
Yeah.
Trump was, Barack called Trump Hitler in the last election cycle.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Crazy, man. Crazy. Okay, what else do we have here? Yeah, he's threatening them basically. Every city and country without exception, which does not act accordingly, shall be destroyed in wrath. So who's going to really do this at that point, right? You still can. You can attack the Jews, but it's not going to look too good for you, the outcome.
Yeah, it's
you best to leave them alone.
So again, nothing contradicts the canon with this decree. No. There is a little bit more detail in here that even above and beyond the Septuagint, but the Septuagint very much talks about the same thing, just with less words. So,
yeah.
Yep.
All right, brother. Want to do F? After chapter 10, I can read this one. So this is after chapter 10. This is pretty much the last section here. We're doing pretty good time wise, so we'll go through this and call it a day. Okay. So, and Mordecai said, "These things have come from God, for I remember the dream that I had concerning these matters, and none of them has failed to be fulfilled. The tiny spring which became a river, and there was light, and the sun and abundant water. The river is Esther, whom the king married and made queen. The two dragons are Haman and myself. The nations are those that gathered to destroy the name of the Jews. And my nation, this is Israel, who cried out to God and were saved. The Lord has saved his people. The Lord has delivered us from all these evils. God has done great signs and wonders, which have not occurred among the nations. For this purpose, he made two lots, one for the people of God and one for all the nations. And these two lots came to the hour and moment and day of decision before God and among all the nations. And God remembered his people and vindicated his inheritance. So they will observe these days in the month of Adar, and on the 14th and 15th of that month, with an assembly and joy and gladness before God from generation to generation forever among his people. In the 4th year of the reign of Ptolemy and Cleopatra, Dositheus, who said that he was a priest and a Levite, and Ptolemy, his son, brought to Egypt the preceding letter of Purim, which they said was genuine and had been translated by Lysicamus, the son of Ptolemy, one of the residents of Jerusalem. So yeah, the Lexham English Septuagint clumps that last, I guess, additions Esther 11. If you're going to the pseudepigrapha, it clumps it together with this one. So, which makes sense to me why they would do that. But so here we have Mordecai essentially saying it. God intervened.
Yep.
God was definitely a big part of this, and that would validate or invalidate the claims that scholars would have to make about how Yahweh wasn't really involved much. Like, what's the point of this book? Which again lends to what you were saying about why the religious elite that participated in the Masoretic version, like why they wouldn't want this book in the canon, right?
Yeah, and what's unique about that is that's latter. The Masoretes would be latter descendants of possibly the Pharisees, right? Whereas Josephus, 2nd century, in Antiquity of the Jews, is pulling from the seditions to make his recap of the story of Esther. So that's where he was a Pharisee in the 2nd century who didn't have any problem with Esther, but instead is affirming the story and talking about it with information from these editions. So at some point, the Orthodox Jewish people that claim to be espousing proper doctrine, in their minds, they believe that this was legit, and that's on the other side. Like, so even if Josephus didn't agree with the Septuagint translations in his day, 100, 200 years before him, you had multiple versions of Greek manuscripts translated from a previous language that we don't exactly know. It's a suspected Aramaic that had all these additions in it, and that would have been a part of the scrolls and all the libraries that people had. That they're resources from which they drew from and they believed were considered sacred writings. I mean, again, the whole, this is why it baffles me that so many people buck against the story of Ptolemy.
The translating the Septuagint. Yeah.
So here is something, Additions to Esther, which was in the Catholic, still is in the Catholic Bible, right?
Is it? Remember. I'm not sure if is it.
Yeah, one second.
While you're looking that up, I agree with the Kingdom Concept saying the Greek copy of Esther, the Septuagint version of Esther, chapter 8:17 mentions the nations being circumcised. Yeah, they went and circumcised themselves to go into covenant, right?
Yeah.
And so the Masoretic doesn't contain that because they don't want the nations joining in, right? They want to isolate themselves to being the only people of God, and everything else is a Gentile and second class and all this other stuff.
Yeah, so let me see here if I can find this. What this reminds me of, Ken, as I look for this, it reminds me of Bale and the Dragon, right? It's supposed to go into Daniel chapter 3. Makes perfect sense that it would be in Daniel chapter 3, but it's somehow considered a separate copy or a separate work.
Yeah.
But yet it goes with Daniel chapter 3, and you're like, what's going on here? Why was it pulled out and separated?
Same with the prayer of Azariah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Additions to Esther is in the 16th and 17th century KJV, which used by the Catholic Church and the Protestants. So I don't understand why, if that's being carried on for some great time, I just don't understand why it's suddenly being pulled out or been, I don't know, it's just always been considered, oh, this is what was translated from the Vulgate. I mean, now we read that Jerome didn't want to translate it because he couldn't find Hebrew copies of it.
Yeah.
But yet that's just assuming that, well, even though it's also acknowledged that they're Aramaic copies, which Aramaic is a version of Hebrew. It's a latter version of Hebrew, of ancient Hebrew. Yeah. So you're asking yourself, like, why was Jerome, hesitant to put it into?
Like he's pandering to the the Jewish elite, right? Like, and how they aspire to collect a canon of their own version, right? An edited version that they want to claim as the authorized version. And so you see this all through. I mean, I know this isn't maybe news for folks, but we see this within the writings of the the quote unquote early church fathers talking about how these guys are editing and splicing things out. And so they have a history of doing this type of stuff, right? And so if these books are found in any other languages, it's like a second class language. Therefore, you should look at it with a raised eyebrow. Is it, can you trust it because it's not in the holy language of Hebrew,
right?
And
Which is just a false straw man argument,
Yeah.
Especially because we have, like in the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, once he has his mind restored to him, he makes that edict to 127 provinces in his nation that Yahweh is the true King of Kings, and so it just makes you wonder. You've got that, plus then what, 150 years later, you got this, and you're like, what's going on here, right? So imagine living in the Empire of Babylon, and say you're in India, and here comes this edict from Nebuchadnezzar that's saying, "Oh, the real Most High God is the God of Daniel," and then you've got Artaxerxes taking over, and now he's saying,
It's
"Oh
similar.
yeah, they have righteous laws. Their God has saved them," and he's and then you're sitting there going, "Is it possible?" That's why in Esther chapter 8 in the Septuagint it talks about, I think it's in chapter 8, talks about them being circumcised.
Yeah, 8 verse 12. I just mentioned that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hang on a second. That's weird. Is that on the Lexham?
It's in. I think it's also in the Brentons.
I thought it was in the Brentons, but I don't see it now. Because I did a whole show on this 4 years ago.
Yeah, okay, it's not in the Lexham. Hold on a sec. Yeah, it's in one of these versions. It talks about how they go and circumcise themselves and join covenant with the Jews, right?
Maybe it was at the end. Maybe it's in chapter. No, but yeah, you're right. That was it's in there. I just got to find it. That's a huge deal, right? That's a huge deal because the claim is that they have their own festivals and feasts that they were trying to keep. So why would you want to circumcise people unless they're trying to keep Passover with you?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a huge claim. And this is where, and I pointed this out before we started the show, and maybe we could talk about it just real quick as we end. On that last slides that you had on screen there.
Do you want to pull back up?
Yeah, that last edition that we were talking about.
Yeah.
It calls the loyal Persians in this decree. So if you go back a couple slides. Maybe one more back. Sorry. I can't remember what
in this previous segment, like the last segment we just talked about, or was it a sub previous?
I can't remember now, but I thought it was in the most last segment, but maybe it wasn't. It is in the letter in the decree that they can keep it along with the loyal Persians.
I think it's back here. Maybe you shall observe this day, notable among your
verse 23.
Yes.
Salvation for us, that's the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, and then loyal Persians. And so this is what I was talking about. That you're not going to call it loyal Persians. From this context anyway, it doesn't seem like you'd call it loyal Persians if these were just people that cared not about Yahweh, that weren't a part of the covenant, that weren't, that loyal to what, to whom?
Yeah.
Like, unless, I mean, he's already claimed his whole kingdom was loyal to him, except for Haman's lies about the Jewish people, right?
Yeah.
He already claimed that there would be peace if we could just get rid of these Jewish people, according to Haman's lies. So he's not talking about any other people within these 127 provinces that are trying to be disloyal. So to me, it doesn't make any sense that this is, because it's talking about the commemorative festivals in verse 22, right? That they should be able to celebrate them, which to me, that's the feast of God. So you've got the Jewish people going into the nation of Babylon, who want to celebrate their commemorative festivals. And so not just this day of Purim, but multiple festivals, plural. So this is where I just think it's unique. Like, imagine God saying, "Oh yeah, like I want to make you a light to the nations. You can't keep it together inside your own lands. I'm just going to put you in other people's lands, and you can be a light to them there."
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
as you do my ways and observe my feasts and my Sabbaths, and you have laws that are contrary to every other nation. As you go and you do those in the other nations, you're
Hmm.
going to bring in some people, right? Which is
Yeah.
like the modern day, the modern day dispersion. We're seeing
Mm.
that in the first dispersion.
You don't think you okay. I see why you would think that in verse 22. I guess I read that differently. I just thought that it's meant like you can continue doing your normal festivals as Persians, like whatever they celebrated, right? But then add this one. This
All
will be
right.
a
So,
different. It could be talking about the festivals of God. Um, but
okay, I could be wrong. Yeah, I could be wrong, but I thought it was talking about the laws of the Jews and how they're able to do them. Anyway, I'm just trying to say it's odd to me that they're allowing people from the nations to be circumcised alongside the Jewish people.
sure, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We're probably gonna have to do the Masoretic versus the Septuagint version of this book, like we did Job.
Yeah.
Because I remember when I was even just going over this, studying for this, I had forgotten, like I had read the Septuagint version of Esther years ago, and I forgot that it mentions how like Esther was actually, according to the Septuagint, was slated to, I guess, like Mordecai wanted to take her as a wife, which is completely different than the Masoretic version, right? It was just like she was a niece or something like that that he was watching over, and he was watching over her, but like I guess he was a little upset about Xerxes taking her. So I don't know. It just has some details in there where you're like, oh, didn't really know that. That's different than the other version
Yeah.
that I've known.
Apparently she was a hottie. So
Yeah, I guess she was. Yeah. Well, that was cool, man. This was good. I'm giving it a thumbs up. I'm convinced that this should be part of the overall contextual, working of the Book of Esther. I think these editions don't derail it in any way. People get hung up on scholarly opinions a lot, and I
mhm.
understand why. This is why we do the show, Sean, right? We kind of just like, what are the scholarly opinions and what are people having issues with? And it seems like a lot of times they just don't really understand the overarching picture of what the scriptures have to say in general. Just because they're good with languages and good with manuscript histories and stuff like that doesn't mean they really understand the context of what the words actually say. Um, so I don't know. I didn't have any issues with it really.
Oh, Westhoff.
Yeah, hardcore, man. Hardcore. He did a good job. It's good that he got on
Yeah,
the Rogan show, but
I'm happy for the exposure overall, but yeah, like uh,
God didn't die on the cross. I'm sorry. Like that's
yeah, there's
we
some
gotta
things. Being a historical expert does of manuscripts and their history, it doesn't mean that you're theologically
down. Yeah.
sound and astute. So
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Awesome, brother. Well, I enjoyed this. We might get back to Sirach next. We'll see. Maybe we'll take a little longer of a break. I did want to go through that book kind of line by line with you again, but
mhm.
we got a lot of extra biblical books that we need to tackle, and so I'm glad we got this one out of the way. Hopefully, people have been interested in what we do here and
Yeah,
found today's episode interesting, guys. I apologize again for some of the ambiguity at the beginning that Sean and I were discussing, just regarding which version of these editions um, to look through. I'd highly recommend, again, the Lexham English Septuagint. Look through there, just how they've layered it out. It makes sense as you're reading it in the timeline.
it does.
But either way, refamiliarize yourself with the actual book of Esther and then read these editions and see how they can work. Don't just pluck them out, like isolate them and try to parse the meanings and the this and that with it. Just keep it in the context of the book itself and you'll see how it works. So thank you so much, guys, for joining us. For those of you who watched live, for those who will watch after the live show is over, we appreciate you guys. If you enjoyed this, please hit the thumbs up if you liked it. If you didn't, thumbs down. That's fine. Leave your comments in the comment section and subscribe to the channel, Hanging on His Words. I would appreciate that. Also, go over to Sean Griffin's YouTube channel, Kingdom in Context, and give him a subscription if you're new here and don't know who he is. Dude, he does a lot of good work there. We love him. He's a good brother. And God's doing great things, Sean. Doing great things. The truth cannot be stopped, my friend. It cannot be stopped. And
right.
We're going to continue doing shows like this as long as we have breath in our lungs. We're going to preach the gospel of the kingdom of God until, until whoever wants us not to will oppress us and make that so. But until then, we're going to just do this. And I love it. And I look forward to getting, more of these episodes done with you. And, and if I have to become an American soon, whatever. All of it doesn't matter anyways. We're citizens of heaven, right?
Yeah.
We're sons of glory, and
Yeah.
and soon to be resurrected sons of glory. So that's what we're keeping our eyes on. We're not worried about the politics of today. Just like Esther and Mordecai and all them, they weren't. Yeah, they were concerned. They had a genocide to deal with. We don't have that yet. So let's continue just doing our Father's work and keep the commandments, keep covenant with Him. And
well, I'll tell you what, if the United States ends up taking Greenland, this would be an extra excuse for me to stop in Nova Scotia on the way to Greenland. Yeah.
Exactly. I'd like some mobility rights between here and where you reside, Sean, without that border there. So
yeah.
Hey,
Interesting.
It could be cool. It could be interesting. Who knows what's going to happen? But either way, Yahweh controls all the kingdoms of the world, and so keep your faith and trust in Him, folks.
Yeah, we're not our allegiance is not to cloth flags. Our allegiance is to Christ and be clothed in His righteousness.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Well, thanks, brother. I appreciate you. I appreciate your wisdom that you bring to this show, and much love to you. Much love to you, brothers and sisters. Thank you for supporting us over the years. We are blessed and are thankful for all the kind words, donations, all of it that you guys provide us with. It goes a long way. So we appreciate you, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye, guys. Thank you.